So without further ado, let me hand over to Stephanie, who is an acclaimed author, instructor, and KM consultant. She's been a friend of KMI's for over 10 years now, I think. And we're just excited to get going here with her course and more webinars and more great content about this exciting new topic of radical KM. And I'll hand it over to you, Stephanie.
Great, thanks, Eric. And I'm just going to share my PowerPoint here. So there we go. And oh, let me just fix my window so that I can. There. Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited about this. This presentation webinar is based on a paper that will be published in March by Business Information Review. So I'll make sure that Eric gets you out the link to the article when it comes out, or a copy of the PDF or something if you're interested. So that'll be out in a couple of weeks because it's almost March. I'm not sure how that happened. And this is the third webinar that I've done with KMI around Radical KM, or Creative KM, as we call the CKS course. But this builds on the other ones, and the other two recordings are out on YouTube someplace. I'm sure Eric can share that maybe in the chat window or something. So yeah, let's get started here. So I noticed some familiar names on the sign-up list. So some of you already know who I am, but for those of you who don't know who I am, I am a Canadian. I'm based in Berlin. I moved to Berlin 6 years ago. 6.5 years ago, and have been doing knowledge management for as an independent consultant for 19 years this year, and I did for 4 years at Hewlett Packard before I went out on my own. So, and I have an undergrad in accounting and an MBA in IT. So lots of process, lots of analytical stuff. So I know what I talk about, or know about that whole side of things. And so you might be a bit surprised about some of the things that I'm going to talk about, because I'm going to talk about painting and creativity and how important that is. So my business is called Entelechy, which means realization of potential. So, and I'm chief chaos organizer, because I think that describes a lot of what knowledge management ends up being a lot of times. Lots of chaos to figure out how to organize and make sense out of what makes sense for our organizations. So, like I say, some of you have probably been on some of the other webinars or watched the recordings. So you're going to be familiar with this little thing next. Hopefully nobody's driving. Less of an issue, I think, these days. Lots of people working from home still. So we're going to get comfortable and take a long, slow, deep breath and close your eyes. Picture in your mind's eye a small and delicate flower floating gently inside your skull, just behind the bone of your forehead. Notice the flower's color, its shape, the pattern of its petals. Let the flower drift slowly downward, gliding gently down your throat into your rib cage, drifting down and down between your lungs, downward, gently downward, coming to rest in the lowest place in your abdomen, the place where your breath reaches when you breathe fully and deeply. A quiet touch of color deep in the darkness of your abdomen. Hold the flower there. Hold it. Hold it. Now let it go. let the flower vanish. But stay focused on the place where it was, deep down in the dark center of you. Focus on the darkness. Now, when you're ready, and only when you're ready, open your eyes and come back into our virtual Zoom room. And if anyone would like to share their experience of that guided meditation or visualization, maybe share it in the chat window. Eric can read them off, or you can unmute for a minute and share it audibly, if that's a word, with your voice. And yeah, so I'll give you a second if anybody wants to type something or chime in with something. A lot of times when I do this, people aren't used to doing this kind of activity, especially not in a business meeting. So there's some interesting things come up. I've found with the sort of the chaos and everything that we're dealing with now, that taking a few minutes at the beginning just to calm and center and focus is really helpful. So I often do it at the beginning of my meetings. So anybody got anything they want to share? Okay, I'm going to move on. So thank you for joining me today, or joining us today. I'm really excited about this. So in this first couple of minutes, a few minutes, is going to be repeat, just for people that haven't been on the other webinars. So we'll get to the, I promise we'll get to the new stuff shortly. So the state of the world these days is a bit chaotic. That seems to be on the tip of my tongue at the moment. So let's go with chaotic. Disorganized, lots of things going on. It's changing. They're just changing the hygiene requirements in Germany for COVID. So I got to figure out what those are starting this week, and or how they've changed and how it affects me. And all this stuff is changing all the time, whether we can work from our offices or have to work from home when the kids are going to school or not going to school. We got lots of stuff going on, but even given all of that, people want to be more engaged. And I think, especially in the US, with the mass resignation, I forget what the word is in the media they're using for that, but yes, this huge resignation. I think people are realizing that they want to be more engaged and be more collaborative and have a purpose in what they're doing, and they want to get more out of their jobs. They don't just want to be a cog in the wheel. So they want to be coached and not managed, and and the rest of the stuff that I've listed out on this slide. And so they're looking for new places to work because the old places aren't really working for them anymore. So we've got the individual basis, and then we've got this VUCA world around us with changing technology and changing COVID rules and changing workplaces and more data all the time about how we should do things or not do things. And so there's just all this volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity and that we're sort of constantly having to cope with and figure out, what I need to know today, or how I need to, change my behaviors today, or do I need to change the project I'm working on or do something different? All of this stuff is changing all the time. So, but we're used to a bit more stability. And so the question is, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with our changing, desires for what we get out of our jobs? How do we deal with VUCA? How do we cope going forward? Well, and not just cope, but hopefully thrive going forward. So radical KM is an idea that I actually started working on a little bit more than 10 years ago now. And I did call it Creative KM for a long time, but the pandemic gave me the opportunity to sit down and take stock of everything and look at all the pieces and do a bit more research and put the pieces together in a different way. And I started calling it Radical KM about 1.5 years ago, when I wrote the first paper that was published last year. And when I changed the name and started calling it Radical KM, that really seemed to speak to people in a way that Creative KM didn't. So it's been good for that. Although, like I said, we do call the CKS Creative KM because it helps people understand a little bit more what we're actually talking about. But so these are all the pieces, and I was looking at this earlier. I think I need to add a few more pieces to this ever expanding puzzle that makes up Radical KM. So, but lots of stuff that goes into it. It's about the intersection of it and things that we have lost because of the way the world has worked. So radical knowledge management is people, process, and technology. And KM has always been people, process, and technology. Certainly as long as I have been doing it, it has. And so none of that's going away. It's that it's not sufficient. In the world the way that it is and the way that it's going, we need to add some creativity and add some flexibility and add some bigger picture thinking in, that we get through our creativity. And that's where we come up with where I came up with radical knowledge management. So it's really about the intersection of all of these things: information and documentation, collaboration and knowledge sharing, and innovation and creativity. They're all fed into it. In the past, it was much more about lessons learned and communities of practice and those traditional KM activities. And like I say, those aren't going away. They're still useful. It's that in the present and the future, we need to up our game, and help our organizations mature and move forward and embrace the way the world is going. And so help us deal with uncertainty and help us learn continually, because everything is changing. So it's not so much remembering things, it's knowing where to look things up or what questions to ask, and just trialing and erroring everything and see what works and what doesn't. Because oftentimes that can change from day to day, can change from week to week or month to month, but it's definitely changing. There's not a whole lot that's staying the same for very long. So, and Radical KM creates a space in our organizations to be both creative and analytical. We have focused so much on the analytical part, the rational and the logical, and the making sense out of things, and we've really lost sight of the creativity and the fact that the magic of innovation and the magic of connections and finding solutions to intractable problems comes out of creating some space and being creative and looking at things from a different perspective. So that's what Radical KM is about making some space in our organizations to do this. And it's interesting because the first paper that was published last July was actually published in Frontiers in AI, a special issue that they were looking at knowledge management. And so one of the reviewers came back and was like, well, your paper's not about AI and it's in an AI journal, you got to do something about this. And so I put in, if you read the article, it says, there's a couple of lines in there that says this paper takes a contrarian view because creativity is what differentiates us from AI, and this is where we need to become stronger and better, because it's going to be a long time before AI really can be creative and not just mimicking something that's been done previously. So yeah, the creativity is what's going to make us better than the technology for a while longer yet. And we need to relearn it because it's been educated out of us. So much of the education system that was set up in the late 1800s, 1900s, even now, still is so focused on preparing people for work in an office or in a factory and this production line, and understanding process and automation from that perspective, and being efficient and effective, and optimizing everything. I remember, when I did my MBA, one of the classes I took was about production optimization, and so this is still the focus in a lot of the education. And yet what we really need is to be creative and to look at problems differently, and look at the world differently, and not expecting to have the answer when we start, but know that we'll have the answer when we finish. And we used to plan, I used to do project plans, and especially when I was at HP, that had 200, 300, 400 tasks on them. And now I start with an outline and fill the tasks in as I go, or as I know them, and keep an eye on where we're going, certainly, and have that overriding vision and the purpose behind what we're doing. But I don't try and map out every step along the way, because it's going to change anyway. So this is why we need to relearn our creativity. This is to bring us back. We're not working in factories anymore. This is knowledge work, and knowledge work needs some more brain cells and some more creativity and different approaches than just putting together automobiles. So this work is important because it allows us to experiment, to come out of our boxes and comfort zones. And sometimes people get a little worried when I start talking about coming out of our comfort zones and doing things that make you a bit uncomfortable. But it's really important. If we're going to do things differently and take a different approach, we have to be at least a bit uncomfortable. And from my perspective, the more uncomfortable, the better, because there's more opportunity in that. It also gives us a voice and redirects our energy, and it's a good stress relief and helps improve focus, like the guided meditation we did at the beginning. It helps just to focus us and improves our resiliency. Having a creativity practice helps us be more flexible and bounce back a little bit better from things. And most importantly, or one of the most important things certainly, is improved problem solving, coming up with new things. And by tapping into our creativity, we bring our whole authentic self to work, to our jobs. We're not leaving part of ourselves at home and just being rational and logical and analytical anymore. We're bringing our whole self. And this gives us opportunity to build our own leadership skills, but also helps us help others build their leadership skills as well. So benefits all around. Creativity enables us, and this was really interesting, and I'll bring the rest of them up. When I wrote the article, I couldn't find anybody else that was saying this, about talking about what we've lost by excluding creativity. And yet when I looked at these sustainable behaviors, the sustainable mindset and the systems thinking, relationship building, these things, I looked at them like, well, these are things that we learn from tapping into our inner artist, our inner creativity. We learn these things, and yet so they've been educated out of us. And this is why, from my perspective, people don't make the right decisions, or the right sustainable decisions for our organizations or for themselves. So bringing creativity in re-enables all of these things, all of these behaviors that make us more sustainable in our approach to things, sustainable leadership. So these are a few of the ways we can become more creative: playing, doing arts and crafts, exercising, meditating, all of these things, being mindful, meeting new people and asking questions, doing things that is new or different, that might make you look at the world differently. And also just basic things like getting enough sleep, so that you have the energy and the focus to look at things and question, and don't just do the same thing over and over and over again. So we're going to do a quick little activity, and then I'll get into the new stuff. So take a piece of paper and a pen or pencil, whatever you got on your desk. If you don't have a piece of paper, use a notebook or whatever you got handy. I got a piece of paper, I got a pen. Actually, I'm going to use a marker. I have some markers. So, and we're going to do our little scribble drawings, because I am a fan of my scribble drawings. I do actually have other things to do, for those of you who've been on other webinars with me, but this is my favorite one. So I will admit to being a bit lazy and do the same one all the time, oftentimes, but they're different every time. So why not? Okay, so scribble drawings. This is about freeing up our mind to think, getting your head out of what is this supposed to look like, and just put some ink or some pencil or some marker on your piece of paper. So close your eyes and take a deep breath and make a scribble on your paper. And I will hold mine up so you can see what I did. Hopefully the pink marker, the fuchsia marker comes through okay. And now just rotate it around, see which way you like it oriented. Maybe you want it oriented a different way than from what you drew it. And then you can keep your eyes open now. The eyes closed were just for the first scribble. And then, yeah, once you've figured out how you want it oriented, add something to it that builds it up, that starts another layer, that adds something to it. Don't worry about making it look like something. It does not need to look like anything at all. Mine generally don't. I just kind of go with how I'm feeling, what shapes I want to add to it. So after you've added a second stroke to what was first there, turn it again, rotate it. Maybe it needs to be oriented differently again, and then make a third line. And I don't know what this is looking like. I'll show you what mine is looking like just for fun. We're going to add a line number 4. And again, you can rotate it around and see what feels like right, and add line number 5 or squiggle number 5 or embellishment number 5. And then this is the last one. And I don't know. This is what mine looks like. So it doesn't need to look like anything. It's just the squiggles just came out. So sometimes I did one a couple of weeks ago on a session I was doing, and mine actually looked like a person. And it was laying here on my desk somewhere, but I don't know where it is anymore. I cleaned up my desk. It probably went in the garbage. But these are just about getting your mind focused or unfocused, and making some space. Again, if anybody wants to chime in on the chat, maybe with what their experience of the scribble drawing was, I'll give you a second to do that, and we can share them. The great thing about these is they don't have to be anything at all, and people generally throw them out, in the garbage can on the way out the door, and when I've done them in in-person workshops. But they really shift the energy in the room. And they're probably my favorite, because they're the first thing that I did in 2011, when I started this idea of the connection with creativity and the arts and knowledge management. And I thought, well, I'm going to just try it and see what happens. And it really shifted we were in a requirements analysis workshop for trying to pick out some technology or get to the requirements so that we could pick out the technology that would support their KM program. And just these workshops are tough. They're really analytical and logical. We go through all this process stuff and thinking about how they're doing the work and talking about all this really not difficult, but really dry stuff. And so I started and ended the session, the 2 or 3 hour workshop with these scribble drawings. And it was really interesting to me, the engagement and the shift in the energy that people were kind of dreading sitting there for 2 hours or 2.5 hours for the workshop, for the requirements analysis. But starting off with this little 5-minute thing really got people engaged in a different way and got some different answers to the questions than I was used to getting, and people looking at things and questioning things in a different way. So I was really surprised, very positively surprised, that such a simple exercise could have this impact. And then doing them at the end just kind of refreshes everybody after 3 hours of, going through processes and how they do their jobs and taxonomies and all this kind of stuff. To do them at the end just kind of revives everybody and gives them a little bit of fun before they go back to their desks. So they go back to the hundreds of emails waiting for them with a smile on their face, which was nice and interesting to see. So Eric, are there anything there in the chat window that you want to share before I get into the next thing, or should I just keep going? Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Here's the new stuff. Implementation. This is a big topic for everybody. How do we implement it? And there's a tendency, I think, to make it harder than it is. I think we look at it and KM tends to be a bit complex, maybe a bit more than a bit complex in some organizations, depending on the size and what you're trying to accomplish. And so we look at this creativity stuff and the art space stuff that I do with it and kind of get overwhelmed and think that it's got to be, we need all these art supplies, we need all this space, we need all this. You don't. You can start, we did the scribble drawing, and this is part of why I do the scribble drawings and these little icebreaker activities in the workshops and these sessions that I do, so that you can see how simple it can be. It doesn't have to be big and complicated. There is big and complicated, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But these little icebreakers are a great way to start and introduce the ideas and get some support within the organization before you get into something bigger, more complicated. So, So implementing Radical KM really is about going back to the roots of how we learn. If we look at knowledge management as a learning activity, it's about Radical KM is about then going back to how we learn. In fact, radical that's one of the definitions, is about going back to the roots. So it's about being playful and curious and iterative and learning as much like how we learned when we were children. So just reactivating that curiosity and trying things out. It's also really, and KM is like this anyway, but even more so, it's really dependent on the culture and the maturity of the organization. So it's hard to make a blanket statement. You really need to understand where your organization is, how open they are to the ideas, how to best work with your organization to start bringing some of these ideas in and moving forward. So in this case, one small step at a time is a really good way to go, especially in some organizations that are really, really resistant to it. So start off with the scribble drawings or the guided meditation and do that for a month or two, and see, how that goes. Start sharing some stories and some case studies, because there are case studies and examples of organizations doing this kind of work. So yeah, start small. Don't try to boil the ocean. There's, oh, did I miss a slide? No, sorry. So why should we implement radical KM? If it's this, if there's going to be this resistance, why should we implement it? Well, it helps us mature the culture around KM. It improves collaboration, sharing, and learning. I'm not going to read all these things. You can read them out, and yeah, while I kind of talk here, but there are lots of reasons to implement radical KM, not least of which is we really need to be doing things differently. The old ways of doing things have kind of got us in a bit of a mess, to put it lightly or nicely, and we really need to take a step back and look at how we've been doing things and ask the question of how we can do better, how we can make our organizations better, more healthier, how we can make the decisions that enable the organization to make better decisions as a whole and have better impact, socioeconomically, environmentally, big picture, global stuff. So we've broken things down into these little boxes because the boxes make us comfortable and gives us the impression of certainty. But what they do is take things out of context and out of the system that they're part of. And so it takes the magic and the innovation and the different thinking and different solutions comes out of the white space between the boxes, comes out of the integration of the boxes. And so trying to put everything in a box and label everything has just taken us down the wrong road. So yeah. So hopefully you've read through the rest of the points. And so implementation paths. There's two main paths that I was mentioning a couple of minutes ago. Start small with individual team stuff, the icebreakers, or you can start bigger with a larger, more structured approach. Depends on the culture of the organization, what they're open to. Yeah, so you can make a decision. You can do kind of a blended approach as well if you want to. I definitely would advise not going too big too fast. So it requires some patience and iteration and communication and sharing stories and explaining why this is important and the benefits and yeah, and all of these things that we already know about with implementing our KM programs. So with the icebreaker, the KM team can facilitate small acts of creativity within the organization setting. So come in and lead a scribble drawing, lead a guided meditation for a few minutes if people are uncomfortable with some of these games and activities. And just encourage people to be more creative on an individual and team basis. So even if they're doing these things, these little things at work, encourage them to do some bigger things maybe at home with their kids, with their partners, with their friends. Go do some painting, go for a hike, build some sculpture when they go to the park, with the twigs and leaves and whatever bits and pieces are moving around, laying around. So just do things that encourage creativity as outside of work as well. And the purpose is really, in the work setting at least, although I would argue possibly in a personal setting as well, to get people out of their comfort zones and get them thinking differently, looking at the world differently. Hopefully bigger picture, understanding, the systemic nature of things, seeing things from a different perspective. The studio approach is a bit bigger, certainly. Takes a bit more time to set up, have a space, name the space. I've listed out some good practices there that comes from one of the case studies. You need to staff it up with 1 or 2 facilitators and have a plan, have an approach to how the facilitation happens. It's really important when people see these art materials that they understand that artistic skill isn't necessary. It's just a means to an end. And I always say to people, you can throw this out at the end. Even a painting, in the class, we do layered paintings, and people get very, or can get very anxious about it. And I always say, you can throw it out at the end. We're not painting the Mona Lisa. This is not going in the Louvre or, your local art gallery. This is just for you. It's about the process. It's about the insights that are gained. It's about learning and experiencing, and it can absolutely be thrown out at the end of the day. Now, what happens is a lot of people are surprised and delighted with what they're able to create, and it gets hung up on their living room walls or their kitchen wall, or somewhere where they can see it on their office, on their cubicle. So it's about ultimately having an open mind and just having the experience of putting the paint on the canvas and seeing what happens. So the studio takes a bit more work in these days as well with COVID. People are in the office less, so you can modify this for a virtual environment. But it takes a bit of thinking about how to do it and getting supplies, and some of the things that you can do from a facilitation perspective are a bit different, because you need to take into account the virtual nature of things, but it can still be done. There's still lots to accomplish even in a virtual world. So studio. So this is a case study. These are those points on the other slide, 2 slides ago. This is a case study that comes from, it was the Danish government. It was published in a book. These Stefan and David have done a lot of work in this space, so they've actually got a few articles that they've written on this idea of bringing the arts into organizations. So the situation was that this innovation and knowledge sharing department at the Danish government was faced with a lack of collaboration and knowledge sharing between its 2 biggest departments, lawmaking and citizen services. They just didn't get along. They didn't share knowledge. We've all seen this in our own organizations. So yeah, conflicts, not aligned on purpose and what they're trying to achieve, and and all these things. So lots of friction there. So yeah, we've seen this. Lots of politics come in, and yeah, lots of issues. So this was the situation that faced the IKS team at the Danish government. So. And what they did, they established this organizational studio. They spent a year actually preparing the space, finding the right room in the office that was close to these 2 departments that were the prime focus of the work, but not in either the space that belonged to either one of them. It was in this kind of no man's land in between the 2 groups. They made a process framework for use in facilitating the interaction, so that people understood what was going to happen and how it would work. The results of the pilot were, in the author's words, strikingly good, which is something I like to hear. And of course, what happens when something is strikingly good? The story of the success gets out and made it even more popular within the organization. So they got more requests to use the room to address similar situations in other parts of the organizations. And the room ran successfully for 2 years. And they said that the people that had come in and used it, the room over those 2 years, said that they couldn't have solved the problem in any other way. Again, something you want to hear, some great data there. So what did they do with this great data, this great feedback on this program? They closed it down. There was a reorganization, and the IKS department got disbanded. And that, of course, meant that the studio got shut down and ended the whole thing. So much for database decision-making, because they had the data that supported keeping it going, and they shut it down. I know we've seen this. I've seen this with KM programs and other things. People don't understand the benefit of them, even when they have the numbers. It's an emotional decision and they shut it down. So there we go. Oh, and I've got lots of time for questions. So that's my contact information if anybody wants to reach out to me. The LinkedIn is there. So it's just Stephanie A. Barnes on the URL, so you can find me. This is a partial book list. The full book list, there's I think 36 books on the book list now. I just added another one that I've been reading. These are the main books that I used in writing the initial paper. So that's there. And yeah, let's unshare here and go to this mode so I can see people a little bit, little tiny pictures of everybody. And yeah, if you have a question, comment, anything you want to say, anything you want to share about that experience, feel free to unmute and volunteer your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. My name is Clara. I'm the knowledge manager for a small company in Latin America that's in Guatemala City.
Oh, wow.
Far, far away from where you are. And I am implementing knowledge manager for the management for the first time in the company. It's a whole breakthrough. And as you say, I empathize with you with the fact that I was not a knowledge manager. You know, I come from other things in the company. I come from operations, and I really thank you for the insight, because sometimes I think it's a very hard work to understand the whole what is knowledge management, and you have given me a why they chose me. I am the creative part in a little bit. I was in innovation and operations. So, but I'm very concerned about, I like the idea of a workshop, but with this media now, with the VUCA environment, we are shut down. We all work from home. So if you have any few, I know it's a whole thing, but if you have a few points to make about how to implement something creative online, I would be very grateful, because that's why I'm really, really struggling now.
Oh, yeah. So there's a bunch. I have the scribble drawings, and I have a bunch of other things that you know I do. And those ones are easy because they don't take any special things. And you can do them in, it doesn't matter what your meeting's about, just take 5 minutes at the beginning and do the guided meditation. The guided meditation is in the slides. I'm trying to think if there's, it's I can get you a copy of the guided meditation if you want that, but there's lots of them. If you Google guided meditations, there's a zillion of them around. But I can also send you this one if you want. And just, you know, it's easy enough to do it on Zoom. When I do some of the workshops and when I do the CKS class, we actually paint. So we need to get, and the tricky bit there is to get paint to everybody. So we need to allow enough time to either get it shipped to them or give them the list of stuff and let them go and buy it locally. But then we paint. So you can see my studio behind me. So I move my laptop over there and we paint, and it's honestly just like being in the room, except that I can't go around and look over people's shoulders. I have to get them to hold stuff up to the camera. But the discussions are the same, you know, all of that, the questions are the same. People want to know what happens when I do this, or what can I do this, you know, the questions are the same. So yeah, I think it just takes a bit of thinking about the logistics. But I could do improv games. Some of the stuff I do, little icebreakers, is improv games. The trick there, when we do them in person, we stand in a circle. when you do them on Zoom, you got to number everybody beforehand, so you know what order to go in. So little things like that. But after that, or you can break people out into breakout groups and do improv stuff that way as well. So yeah, a lot of this stuff can be adapted. You just need to take a minute and step back and go, what problems is being in a virtual world going to create? Like the thing with the being in the circle thing, I didn't realize until the first time I came to actually do it and went, oh, hang on, how am I going to do this? Does that help? Okay, great.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Great, you're welcome.
Stephanie, looks like we have a chat question from Amanda.
Okay.
If you scroll back up a few, she asked about examples, and she's down toward the bottom of the chat, but then up a few.
Do examples exist for the types of processes framework they mentioned for the studio? You mean the ones that they were using to facilitate?
Yeah, they said they spent like a year building out process frameworks for like how they were gonna run that, I guess.
Yeah, there unfortunately wasn't a lot of detail in the case study, and I'm actually trying to reach out to the authors to get some more detail on that. I have found some stuff online that's more generic about design studios, and that ties into design thinking. So I'm not sure, because they actually talked in the case study about taking a week and bringing these teams together for a week and facilitating this meeting for a week to problem solve. And the design studio stuff I found online talks about doing it in like 90 minutes. So yeah, I'm from the case study, I don't know. I'm trying to get some more detail on that.
Yeah, not even necessarily to emulate. I'm just curious. Like, it sounds so interesting that they got those types of results from it. I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, and have you ever done a Lego serious play? Participated in one of those workshops? Okay, because there's a methodology there too, and it's ultimately about putting question to people and just giving them some tools. In the case of the Lego serious play, they give them a bunch of Lego to put together, design prototypes for things, or design a vision, use the Lego to create some kind of a vision for the organization or whatever the theme of the purpose of the meeting is, and they give them like a half a day. So there's stuff there as well. So it kind of depends. I know when I have done workshops, I customize it for the organization and what their questions are, and I bring in a variety of activities like the scribble drawings, like the improv, like the painting, depending on how long a session I have, and a bunch of other factors, just to get people out of their comfort zones and thinking differently. And I use them in brainstorming to get people, thinking beyond sort of the obvious things when we do brainstorming. So does that help? Okay.
I think Dorothy is next, and then Travis has a question in chat. But go ahead, Dorothy.
Thank you. I'm sort of like Clara. I am the knowledge management tech lead of the organization over Department of Navy, and I got kind of promoted into that role. I was the lead SharePoint administrator. So my challenge now as the knowledge management tech lead is what I'm facing is that we're migrating into the Microsoft 365 environment. And one of the tools that we're using is SharePoint Online. We're moving from 2019 SharePoint to SharePoint Online. And I'm the lead of this. And my challenge is getting them to understand knowledge management as well as where to store their data. So I'm having a hard time, getting this across to them. Any suggestions? That's my question.
You gotta look at the what's in it for me, and that's different. And that's just having a conversation with people, or with teams, small teams, and understanding what's in it for them, what their pain points are, what would help them do their jobs, and it can be can be a bit time consuming and yeah.
And that's the struggle, getting them to identify their pain points.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, if they're having trouble identifying their pain points, maybe get them to do some of these little creative icebreakers that get them out of their comfort zones and thinking about things differently, just to loosen things up.
Okay.
And yeah,
That helped. I was thinking about the icebreaker, so thanks a lot.
yeah. Oh, you're welcome. Eric, who was next?
Okay. Yeah, I think Travis had more of a comment. Thank you, Travis, for basically a compliment about being able to sort of reuse or repurpose this for his own teaching, which sounds great. And anyone else have any questions for Stephanie before we wrap up?
Oh, we're all done.
I think we're all set. Well,
Excellent.
Stephanie, thank you very much for hosting us today. And just a quick reminder to the audience, we will have the recording available in a few days. We'll do a quick little edit on that and then post that so everyone can share this. And slides, that question came up about slides. Are we able to share that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
Great. I'll put them together in a PDF.
Okay.
So the one slide has the guided meditation all written out. So I'll do them in the notes format so you can get the script for that if anybody wants it. So
will the slides be emailed out?
Yes. Yeah. So the entire guest list.
Mm-hmm.
All right. One last look at the gallery for anything else anyone can think of. And then if not, I think we can call it a day. And thank you, Stephanie, again, for your time today. This was fantastic. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.